a technique or
No,
two.
that makes sense. Going back to the mathematics thing, and this may just be me not making any sense at all, but from a radical constructivist perspective, I find myself wondering, yes, mathematics works. Is it because purely the world, or because of human structure? That is, all human beings understand mathematics, or mathematics are sort of right and wrong answers within it. How much of that is a product of our structure and our way of making sense and organizing information and understanding the world, and how much of that is sort of because of what's out there? I mean, it's obviously some kind of mix, but is it possible there would be creatures from another planet who would come here and have a different mathematics that we can't even comprehend because our structure? So it's a little bit like a toaster toasts and a washer washes, and we understand math a certain way because of how we're built.
Well, Montaron explicitly says that science, let's just take science for a minute, is not a description of an objective world, it's a way of living together.
Right.
So our mathematics is a way of living together.
Mm-hmm.
And presumably, if we were structured differently, we would have a different mathematics.
And see, all those junior high school students are wishing that right about now.
But that does, going back to what Sheila was saying, that does open the door to the issue of morality.
Yes.
Because we embrace science because we kind of like that way of living together.
Mm-hmm.
Those of us who embrace science. And presumably we can invent many different ways of living together, and the question is, which of these do we choose?
But doesn't that bring us back to Bill's concern about relativism? Now we're putting potentially science on par with other perspectives that we might think are not as legitimate or correct or reasonable?
It depends on what science now, it's so-called form which it appears, the hypothetico-deductive system, hypotheses and so forth, it is science as it appears. The original word for science in the ancient Greek world was inquiry, and that is the basic thing that human beings do. It's not about naturona, says science is a discourse, and we choose it because it gets us better along the way. It's because it's about inquiry which unifies us, or gives us one of these groundings. And so the discourse of mathematics, in fact, I thought a better argument against mathematics being used by me in that way was the left-wing view of mathematics. The left wing, if you think about right and left as basic dimensions of personality and ideology, the left-wing view of mathematics is it's a highest form of human play. It has nothing to do with the world. Sure. Whereas the right-wing view of mathematics, the Platonic view, is that the world is structured in terms of mathematics. Part of its fundamental objective structure is a mathematical one. So I could argue against myself and say it is just a playful thing we've invented that happens to work, but I don't want to do that. Who would win the argument? No.
How are we doing in terms of, are you feeling like we want to keep talking amongst ourselves, or do we want to start shifting towards questions from people? Where are people at?
Questions or?
Yeah, you want to start doing it? Yeah, go ahead.
At some point, I was beginning to get the sense that much of what we're talking about was trivial. We live in a world with incredible power hierarchies in which people have no choice of how they're going to live socioeconomically, where we have regimes that use language in ways that are abhorrent, and I'm wondering if we could talk about some of, and it's a moral, ethical issue, is where do we stand when I align myself perhaps with a power structure that will be to my advantage, but it will be at the expense of someone else. Why should I care?
I'd just say something from the perspective of Foucault, who writes a great deal about normalising the use of power. And why I'm attracted to personal constructs, I thought, is it does take me away from that. It gives me what I'm reconstruing and acting on a recognition that the power is arbitrary. I did put that very well, sorry, I wanted to wear back to the idea of the individual, because that's something no one's mentioned. That's what, to me, as an anarchist, is lost in a lot of this discussion. But the point about Foucault is that late in his life, disclosed to his death, he gave up on language and power structures as being the dominant thing and talked about the recalcitrance of the individual and a refusal to lie down. And we're seeing this in the Arab world, you know, no matter how oppressive, and these language structures are also oppressive, people won't cop it forever. A man with a hoe one day will hit us with that hoe. I'm joking, but a man with a hoe. So that's just one response to it, if you want to.
I would say, I think these are the important issues and why we're doing the work we're doing and talking about this stuff. And so from my point of view, if we stay in an individualist model, then we maintain exactly that. And why should I care? It's all about me, you know, as long as I'm doing what I want to do. If we can switch into an understanding of ourselves as relational beings, that the way we live, the morality, the ethical codes by which we live, the things that we value most and so forth, would not exist if there wasn't some communal construction that these are the standards by which we should live. If people start realizing that, then we'll start seeing transformation. The people won't allow that kind of, you know, so it's a shift from, it's not that it's the truth. I think it's an option right now to take a relational orientation that will be, in Bateson's terms, the difference that makes a difference at this point in history. So, you know, and what we say is, you know, you change the world one conversation at a time. You know, I mean, if I think about huge social transformation where there's these gross inequities and violence and oppression, you know, it's overwhelming. But if you think, how can we, where can we make a difference, and how can we kind of fan that fire of difference so that it spreads? Probably idealistic, but.
I guess I wonder, in a world where you have people like Murdoch with extraordinary means of manipulating communications, in which the ideology becomes, well, you know, that all may be very nice left-wing liberal crap, but I'm thinking, for example, of a nephew of mine who's about to become a medical person. His income is going to be going now into 6 figures. His political ideology now is changing, and he is now beginning to move from what was a fairly liberal position to, wait a minute, they shouldn't take my money in taxes.
But, you know, I mean, so we, you know, we
appeal
all
to someone against their selfishness.
Yeah, we're all concerned, or I would assume in this room, we're all concerned with those issues. But I don't think there's going to be, you know, there's no magic bullet. So, you know, and I feel like in a sense, a question like that really begs for someone to say, well, here's the answer. This is what we should do. And it's, you know, it's hard work. And I think we need to keep existing, doing what we're doing as much as we can.
Well, you go ahead first.
Yeah, I just want to make 3 statements on behalf of Matarana. One is, he says, authority is only by concession, which is a very important principle, including if somebody's holding a gun and wants you to do something, still, they only have authority over you if you concede. You may be dead, but you don't have to concede. Second, he says, we save our lives many times over through hypocrisy. And third, he says that, that we are grounded by love, which is a biological stickiness that causes us to want to have recurrent interaction, and which is therefore the source of language and therefore civilization. So those are my 3 contributions to that.
And love is the egalitarian attitude, regard for others as equal to yourself. Regard is the Hegelian, essential of the Hegelian principle. That's why we see Hegel and Tirana from a social and a biological point of view. As to authority, There is no authority. There is no de jure authority by right. There is only authority de facto with the gun. But if we have a concept of living in love, we don't need authority. I'm not a Christian, but the life that Jesus lived with the disciples was, it didn't have constitutions, it didn't have rules, it didn't have you shall not. It was a natural egalitarian society, a little bit with the charismatic figure at the head. So that would be my response to that, and I don't think we're too far away. If that's what Matrona is saying, I don't know much about Matrona.
Dennis Matrona, yeah.
I was just going to kind of comment on the relativity. I like sort of like what's relative and what's not. And I was thinking about sort of like the discussion about the table, and it sort of flowed in and out of table in general and then this table. And I think there's kind of a big difference between, like, it's a little minor down, but it's like, you know, there's confusing the symbol with the reality. And so when we have the discussion of like what table means to you versus me, as much, but what that and you're saying about I'm sitting here and you're sitting there, and so we even experience this table differently. But I think there's something to be said, and I'm trying to negotiate sort of like where your three thoughts would be in terms of where you meet in the middle of table in general versus, you know, like table symbol, word, letter, and stuff, and then table experience going on in the present right now. That table. Do you know what I'm saying? Does that make any sense?
What that makes me think about, one of the things that I say all the time, particularly when we're dealing with change, is